guys, it's Nick, and welcome back to the series for episode 3 of the Forgotten Blackhawk. And this time, it's on a Russian goalie named Nikolai Khabibulin. And he ended his career off as a Chicago Blackhawk in net. His ending was not so good, but he was part of the Blackhawks also during the dark days of the team. So I thought it would be a good way to go with Khabibulin with this Forgotten Blackhawk episode. Khabibulin did start his career off in the 90s. He was drafted in 1992 by the original Winnipeg Jets, 204th overall, in the 9th round of the NHL draft. That's pretty late in his draft, but a goalie who had 18 seasons in the NHL, that's a good move for him. In his career, he had a total of 333 wins, 334 losses, 97 ties, and 46 shootout losses. But his goals against average was a 2.72 and a save percentage of a 907. So that's his career numbers. When he made his NHL debut, he was playing in the 1994-95 seasons with the Winnipeg Jets. He played a total of 26 games that year, had 8 wins, 9 losses, and 4 ties or overtime losses. In that season, he had a save percentage of a .895 and a goals against of a .341. But in his second year, he played more games. He ended up winning 26 games, 20 losses, and 3 overtime or ties in the season for that year in 96 with the Winnipeg Jets. His save percentage was a .908 and a goals against of a .313. So his numbers started to rise. And then the relocation of the Winnipeg Jets to Phoenix to become the Phoenix Coyotes. He played 72 games in the first year in Phoenix, had 30 wins, 33 losses, and 6 overtime losses / ties. Save percentage of a .908, same percentage as he did his previous year with Winnipeg, and he had a 2.83 goals against average. So, as you could see, his numbers started to get better as he became a full-time starter in the NHL. The next season with the Phoenix Coyotes, he had 70 games played, 30 wins, 28 losses, 10 overtime losses or ties, and a save percentage of a 900 and a goals against average of a 2.74. So numbers keep getting better, except for the save percentage. It did drop. His next year with the Coyotes, his final season with the Coyotes, he played 63 games. He had 32 wins, 23 losses, and 7 overtime or ties. And he had a save percentage of a .923 and a goals against of a .213. So good numbers altogether that year for his final year with the Phoenix Coyotes. Then he went to Tampa Bay, where in his first year with Tampa Bay in 2000-2001, he had 2 games played where he ended up going 1-1 in the season, had a save percentage of a .913 and a goals against of a .992. I'm assuming he would have been injured that year because he then came back to Tampa the following year after only having 2 games played in the 01-02 season, where he played 70 games. He won 24 games, lost 32, and had 10 ties or overtime losses. I'm not going on all the numbers though. But he followed that season up with another season in Tampa Bay in the 02-03 season, where he played 65 games. He had 30 wins, 22 losses, 11 overtime losses or ties. He ended up with a .911 save percentage and a 2.47 goals against average. So, solid numbers. And in the season before that, he had a higher goals against and save percentage. Then he went on in the 03-04 season with the Tampa Bay Lightning to go on to win the Stanley Cup, being the starting goalie of the Tampa Bay Lightning in 04. In that season, though, he played 55 games in the regular season, had 28 wins, 19 losses, and 7 overtime losses or ties. He had a save percentage of a .910 and a goals against average of a .233. And then that was his final year with the Tampa Bay Lightning, as there was a lockout in the NHL after winning the Stanley Cup. He then came to Chicago, where in his first season, in the 05-06 season with the Chicago Blackhawks, he played 50 games in net, had 17 wins, 26 losses, 6 overtime losses. Yes, this is now when we get overtime losses and no ties in the NHL. Overtime or shootout losses at this point. As you could see, those numbers are terrible at the first year with the Hawks, because at that time, the Hawks were in the dark days of the team. They were in the dumpster of the NHL. They were in the basement for years. And bringing in Khabibulin was a part of building towards the future. Well, in that season, his save percentage really took a hit. It was a .886 save percentage and a goals against of a .335. As you can see, a bad team gives a solid goalie rough numbers. And that happened for Khabibulin in his first year with the Chicago Blackhawks. But in the 06-07 season, Habby played 60 games. He had 25 wins, 26 losses, 5 overtime or shootout losses, and he had a save percentage of a .902 and his goals against of a .286. Numbers started to show that maybe he's starting to get on the back end of his career, but it's still also part of a lackluster Chicago Blackhawks roster that he's on, that he's trying to be helping this team get from the basement all the way back to the top. But in 07-08, he played, the 07-08 season, Khabibulin played 50 games that year. He had 23 wins, 20 losses, 6 overtime or shootout losses. He ended up with a .909 save percentage that year and a goals against of a .263. So, numbers starting to get better, showing that the Hawks are starting to get better. They barely missed the playoffs that season, and the Hawks are starting to show that maybe this team can be a future contender. And the upcoming season shows. In the 08-09 season with the Chicago Blackhawks, at his age 36 season, yes, he's 36 at this time, Khabibulin, he played 42 games. He split starts with Christopher Huet. I was considering doing Huet for episode 3, but I went with Khabibulin. In that season, he recorded a win-loss record of 25 wins, 8 losses, 7 overtime or shootout losses. Good numbers for Khabibulin, and this gives the Blackhawks their first playoff berth in over 6 years. In that season, he had a save percentage of a .919 and a goals against average of a .233. Good season by Khabibulin, but that would be his last season until a few years later, as the Hawks went on to part ways with Khabibulin in the 09 off-season to bring in Antti Niemi for the spot for the upcoming year to go on to win the Stanley Cup. So Khabibulin could not win the Stanley Cup with the Chicago Blackhawks. But in the 09-2010 season, he ended up with the Edmonton Oilers, where in that season he played 18 games the entire year. He had 7 wins, 9 losses, 2 overtime or shootout losses that year, with a save percentage of a .909 and a goals against average of a .303. And he's on a terrible Edmonton Oilers team at this point. And honestly, at that point in his career, it's starting to show that his numbers aren't going to be what they were with Tampa Bay or even with the Coyotes. Because when he was with the Hawks, his numbers weren't the greatest, but he did get the Hawks to their first playoff run. So in 2010-2011, with the Edmonton Oilers, when he's 38 at this point, Khabibulin played 47 games a year, and he only had 10 wins, 32 losses. Yes, 32 losses. That's some rough numbers right there. And 4 overtime or shootout losses in the season. That I've got to feel bad for Habby for that year, because in that year he had a save percentage of an 890 and a goals against average of a .340. Yeah, at this point, Khabibulin is having that, is at the end of his career. And then he plays 2 more years of Edmonton, and the Edmonton Oilers at this point were garbage. So 2011-2012, he plays 40 games with the Oilers, had 12 wins, 20 losses, and 7 overtime or shootout losses. But his save percentage and goals against average did get better after having that horrendous season in 2011. His save percentage ended up being a .910, and his goals against was a 2.65. Then his final year with the Edmonton Oilers, in the 2012-13 season, the shortened NHL season for the lockout that the Blackhawks ended up going on to win the Stanley Cup in. Great year for the Hawks. Not a good year for the Edmonton Oilers. Khabibulin went on to play 12 games with the Oilers that year, he had 4 wins, 6 losses, 1 overtime or shootout loss, with a save percentage of a .923 on the year and a goals against average of a 2.55. Okay, he ends off his career. Everyone thinks maybe Khabibulin might end his career off. Well, no, the Hawks needed a backup goalie going into the 2013-14 season, as they saw Ray Emery go to the Philadelphia Flyers to where he thought he would become the starting goalie. But the Hawks brought in Khabibulin to try and be the backup to Corey Crawford. It did not pan out. In the 2013-14 season, Nikolai Khabibulin, at the age of 41, had 4 games played, and they were hard to watch being a Blackhawk fan. I remember watching these games, and I felt bad for Habby because he was part of the dark days, and he came back to the Hawks, and this is what happened. He only won 1 game. He had 0 losses and 1 overtime or shootout loss. Yeah, Khabibulin was pulled a lot. In those 4 games, Khabibulin was pulled 3 times, and not 3 times, but 4. He was pulled 2 times, and they were horrendous starts, I would say. And where his save percentage ended up being an .811 and a goals against average of a 5.01. Just in 4 games, yeah, that was a rough go for Khabibulin, where we ended up seeing Antti Raanta take up the backup spot from Nikolai Khabibulin that year, after the Hawks decided Khabibulin's lost it and he is not going to be a good backup for Corey Crawford. So, in his career, he played 5 seasons with the Blackhawks, 4 with Tampa Bay, 5 with the Winnipeg / Phoenix organization, and 4 with Edmonton. Khabibulin saw his best numbers with Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay ended up going on to win a Stanley Cup with him. But as I said, Khabibulin was part of the Blackhawks' dark days of the team, where they were just in the basement almost every game for a long time. And he ended up getting the Blackhawks to their first playoff berth to take them all the way to the Western Conference Final. This is why I did this video on former Blackhawks goalie Nikolai Khabibulin for episode 3 of the Forgotten Blackhawk. He had a long career in the NHL, and he tends to be forgotten, being that he played in the Hawks for 5 seasons of his 18 years in the NHL. In his career with the Blackhawks, he had a .902 save percentage and a goals against average of a .284. With Tampa Bay, he had a .914 save percentage and a goals against average of a 2.39. Yeah, you could see Khabibulin had good numbers with Tampa Bay. But I wanted to do this video on Nikolai Khabibulin for being the fact that he was part of the Blackhawks during the dark days. He came back to try to get one more stint with the Blackhawks. It didn't pan out, but he did technically retire a Chicago Blackhawk. So, this episode for the Forgotten Blackhawk is for Nikolai Khabibulin. So, down in the comments down below, I want to hear what you remember of Nikolai Khabibulin wearing the Blackhawk uniform. And thank you for watching the broadcast. Please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. I will try and get more Forgotten Blackhawks episodes out, but they do take a lot of time. So, for most of all, let's go Hawks!